Back when I was employed before Thanksgiving of last year, I seldom got to see my house during the daylight hours during the short days of winter. But since I've retired, I get to do things, and I get to do them during the middle of the week. A week or so ago, we drove over to Sarasota and visited an Amish village and restaurant over there, right in the middle of upscale Sarasota, and did it during the middle of the week when the crowds were low, and had a great time. Other days, I sit here in my living room reading. I understand this is the way we read now, through on a tablet or a phone instead of using a book. And other times I just sit here and look out my window and enjoy the beautiful state of Florida where I live. The other day, I had some visitors walk right across my yard, right out there. The Sandhill Crane, known scientifically as Antigone canadensis, is a species of large crane, one of two North American cranes. The common name of this bird refers to habitat like that of the Platte River on the edge of Nebraska's Sand Hills on the American plains. This is the most important stopover area for the most numerous subspecies, the lesser sandhill crane, Antigone canadensis, with up to 450,000 of these birds migrating through annually. The sandhill crane was formerly placed in the genus Grus, G-R-U-S, along with the now extremely endangered larger whooping crane, Grus americana. But once DNA became the means of assigning classification, the sandhill crane was reassigned in 2010 to the genus Antigone that had originally been assigned by the German naturalist Ludwig Reichenbach in 1853. The species name, canadensis, is of course the modern Latin word for Canadian. In the first 30 years that I lived in Florida, I saw these birds only when away from home, usually in a wildlife reserve or state park. In recent years, they have become very common. I can now count on seeing a pair or family every day, at least once, usually more often. They will always be down by the lakeside and will frequently come to visit our yard, especially if some food items happen to accidentally appear there. The adults are gray overall. During their breeding, their plumage is usually much worn and stained, particularly in the migratory population, and looks nearly ochre in color. The average weight of the larger males is over 10 pounds, while the average weight of the female is almost 9 pounds, with a range of 6 to 14, almost 15 pounds, with the average height being anywhere from 2.5 to 4.5 feet across the subspecies, of which there are 6. The lesser sandhill crane, the most numerous, which we've already mentioned, the Cuban sandhill crane, the Florida sandhill crane, Mississippi sandhill crane, Canadian sandhill crane, and the greater sandhill crane. The Florida sandhill crane was listed as EC, or easily confused, to facilitate an attempted reintroduction of the whooping crane, Grus americana, into Florida. The attempt failed, but the listing remained. The current list of endangered species includes only 2 subspecies, the Cuban and the Canadian, with the Florida subspecies no longer listed as endangered. Perhaps that is why I can see them on any given day. Sandhill cranes occur in pastures, open prairies, and freshwater wetlands in peninsular Florida from the Everglades to the Okefenokee Swamp. Sandhill cranes' large wingspans, typically 5.5 to over 7.5 feet, make them very skilled soaring birds, similar in style to hawks and eagles. Using thermals to obtain lift, They can stay aloft for many hours, requiring only occasional flapping of their wings, thus expending little energy. In flight, their long, dark legs trail behind, and their long necks keep straight, unlike herons and egrets, who fold their necks into an S-curve in flight. Migratory flocks contain hundreds of birds. The migratory sandhill cranes fly south for winter. In their wintering areas, they form flocks of over 10,000. One place this happens is at Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge, 100 miles south of Albuquerque, New Mexico. An annual Sandhill Crane Festival is held there in November. These cranes have red foreheads, white cheeks, and long, dark, pointed bills. They frequently give loud trumpeting calls that suggest a rolled R in the throat, and they can be heard from long distances. Mated pairs of cranes engage in unison calling and dancing, leaping into the air together. The cranes stand close together, calling in a synchronized and complex duet. The female makes 2 calls for every one from the male. When my kids were growing up, I created great mirth among them, summoning the cranes by duplicating their calls. Sandhill cranes are fairly social birds that usually live in pairs or family groups through the year. During migration and winter, unrelated cranes come together to form survival groups that forage and roost together. Such groups often congregate at migration and winter sites, sometimes, as mentioned, in the thousands. For 27 years, I traveled the 60 miles to Okeechobee to work. When the fields and pastures were flooded, I would sometimes see even these non-migratory Florida sandhill cranes in large numbers in Okeechobee County. Sandhill cranes are mainly herbivorous, but eat various types of food depending on availability. They often feed with their bills down to the ground as they root around for seeds and other foods in shallow wetlands with vegetation or various upland habitats. Cranes readily eat cultivated foods such as corn, wheat, cottonseed, and sorghum. Waste corn is useful to cranes preparing for migration, providing them with nutrients for the long journey. Among northern races of sandhill cranes, their diet is most varied, especially among breeding birds. They variously feed on berries, small mammals, insects, snails, reptiles, and amphibians. Sandhill cranes raise 1 brood per year. In non-migratory populations, laying begins between September and August. In migratory populations, laying begins in April or May. Both members of a breeding pair build the nest using plant material from the surrounding area. Nest sites are usually marshes, bogs, or swales, though occasionally on dry land. Females lay 1 to 3, but usually 2, oval, dull brown eggs with reddish markings. Both parents incubate the eggs for about 30 days. The chicks are precocial, meaning that they hatch covered in down with their eyes open and able to leave the nest within a single day. The parents brood the chicks for up to 3 weeks after hatching, feeding them intensively for the first few weeks, then gradually less frequently until they reach independence at 9 to 10 months old. The chicks, called colts, remain with their parents until 1 or 2 months before the parents lay the next clutch of eggs the following year, remaining with them 10 to 12 months. Immature birds have reddish-brown upper parts and gray underparts. The sexes look alike. After leaving their parents, the chicks form nomadic flocks with other juveniles and non-breeders. They remain in these flocks until they form breeding pairs of their own between 2 and 7 years of age. As a conspicuous ground-dwelling species, sandhill cranes are at risk from predators, which are probably the main non-human source of mortality. Mammals such as foxes, raccoons, coyotes, wolves, cougars, bobcats, and lynx hunt them given any opportunity. Ravens and crows and gulls and smaller raptors such as hawks feed on young cranes and eggs. Cranes of all ages are hunted by both North American species of eagles. Mainly chicks and possibly a few adults may be preyed upon by the great horned owls. In Cuba and Florida, the American alligator and crocodile can take surprisingly large numbers of sandhill cranes, especially recent fledglings. Sandhill cranes defend themselves and their young from aerial predators by jumping and kicking. Actively brooding adults are more likely to react aggressively to potential predators to defend their chicks than do wintering birds, which most often normally try to evade attacks on foot or in flight. For land predators, the cranes move forward, often hissing with their wings open and bills pointed. If the predator persists, the crane stabs with its bill, which is powerful enough to pierce the skull of a small carnivore, and also by kicking. One family member seems always to be on lookout while the others are feeding, and all come to full attention when a threat is perceived. In the 1930s, sandhill cranes were generally almost eliminated east of the Mississippi River, but their populations, unlike those of the whooping crane, have recovered, with there being an estimated 98,000 in the region as of 2018. Although sandhill cranes are not considered threatened as a species, the three southernmost species are quite rare. Many subpopulations were destroyed by hunting and habitat change. Their desirability as a game bird brought them the nickname of ribeye of the sky by a small group of modern hunters. This is something, until my research for this blog, I had not considered, and because of their general approachability, I simply can't imagine. Incredibly, I have seen photos of them being held up like trophy elks. As much as we may enjoy their visits, there always comes a time when, for reasons of their own, they say, "It's time to go," and they're off. And when they're gone, we are poorer for their absence, but richer for their having visited.